Emily. Thank you very much. Well, you may have seen the headlines this weekend questioning reports about the new CDC data revealing that 94% of people who have died from COVID had something else going on with them. Here to set the record straight, Fox News medical contributor and author of Make America Healthy Again, Dr. Nicole Saphier. Dr. Saphier, good Monday morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
I saw this everywhere, this story about how of the people who have died of COVID, only 6% died of COVID. 94% died of the flu, diabetes, heart stuff, things like that. So it makes it sound as if COVID not that bad. We called you in to set the record straight.
Well, that's right, Steve. And over the weekend, you saw a lot of reports going around that the CDC has updated over the 160,000 Americans who have died, saying that only 6% of them had COVID only listed as death. But the truth is, Steve, that a lot of them had underlying comorbidities or just contributing causes of their death. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're chronic illnesses. 43% of them were pneumonia. 47% of them were listed as acute respiratory failure. Not chronic lung disease, but acute respiratory failure. Let's think of it this way, Steve. Think of breast cancer, my specialty. 42% of people who die from breast cancer die from some form of organ failure. 24% of them die from some form of respiratory failure. But those are directly caused by the cancer or by the treatments themselves, meaning they wouldn't have died from those causes had they not had the cancer. And that's the same with a lot of these listed deaths. They wouldn't have died from that acute respiratory failure or sepsis or some of the other causes if they didn't have COVID. COVID, that virus, is what is actually causing those diseases, causing them to die. Yes, they also listed obesity, diabetes, and Alzheimer's in some of the patients. But we know that. We know people who have chronic medical conditions are not faring as well with this virus, just like they don't fare well in general when they're hospitalized with anything. That's why we have to live our healthiest lives. But again, this report tells us that there are a plethora of causes of people dying from COVID-19, but the majority of them are direct damage to the body from the virus. Remember, we talked about that cytokine storm.
Right.
It affects the lungs, it affects the heart, it affects the kidneys, it can affect the brain, and that is why you are seeing these other disease states listed on causes of death. That is responsible reporting of causes of death.
Okay, thank you very much for making that very, very easy to understand. There was a story, meanwhile, from the New York Times talking about how your coronavirus test is positive, and maybe it shouldn't be. And essentially what it said is because millions of people are getting these tests and they come back positive, in some cases, the viral load, the amount of COVID in the person's body is so insignificant, they're likely not as contagious. That's the way I read it. Is that about what the story was trying to say?
Right. Well, Steve, so something that I've been saying for a long time is we keep seeing a lot of positive cases, but what's the clinical significance of those positive cases? Right now, the standard of care for detecting the virus is a nasal swab PCR test. And essentially that looks for genetic material.
Right.
And that genetic material in the nose doesn't necessarily equate to someone having enough virus to be contagious or even to have the infection themselves. So what we need to do is, we don't want to get away from testing people, but we need to change our mindset of how we test people. And that is why these rapid tests, these lateral assay tests, are going to be crucial moving forward when it comes to testing for COVID-19. Because yes, we cannot treat every person that is positive, meaning that they're going to be highly contagious, because the truth is most people aren't infectious or contagious for that full 14 days. They may actually only be contagious for maybe 3 to 7 of those days. And so that's the time that we really want to make sure that they're self-isolating. We need to get people back to work. We need to get people back to school. And sometimes waiting for those long PCR tests to go back to negative may not be realistic, and it may not be necessary. So the Trump administration just vowed to secure 150 million of the Abbott rapid tests. Those rapid tests are a better chance at determining who's going to be contagious and not contagious. But we want to make sure that we're able to do those rapid tests and not just the symptomatic people, but also asymptomatic people, because we have to remember asymptomatic people can spread this viral infection.
Well, there you go. The story behind the headlines, once again. Dr. Saphier, we know so much more now about this thing than we did in March. It's great to have you stop by to try to explain what it all means. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Coming up on this